so it doesn't echo.
Yeah, it was so strange to like read that stuff. And I'm like, who are you people? Like, where were you 10 years ago when we were there doing it? Right? Like, how many of you have actually played it? How many of you are playing it now?
About all the crazy conversation about fourth ed now.
Yeah. Yeah. And the original tweet was like, well, I'm not really talking about fourth. I'm like, 3 of your tweets were talking about fourth. And then you're getting mad at people for talking about fourth. It's so weird.
Yeah, see, I didn't see all the whole conversations that you did. I only saw like the few.
I mean, I don't think I saw all the conversations. That's the problem. You know, I was talking to James Intercastle about it, and he's like, I don't think you're getting them. Like, I read it 7 times. If I'm not getting it, it's not well written. Like, I think a lot about D&D, and I'm on their side. Right?
Yeah.
Like, we were all fourth ed proponents here, so.
Yeah, I played the hell out of 4E.
Yeah.
I like 5E better.
I absolutely like 5E. Like, 4E, when it was out...
It seems like so does everyone else.
When
a great
fourth
deal.
edition was out, it was far and away, in my experience, in my opinion, the best edition of D&D that had ever been made.
It was,
and now I feel the exact same way about 5th.
Right. It was certainly better than 5 with crit confirmations and all the zaniness that went on.
And I
went
can
on there.
Recognize there were, I would argue, a handful of significant issues with 4th edition which is why it was getting long in the tooth before it was.
Well, it depends on how you bin those, whether you think there were a handful or a whole ton, because there were quite a few problems.
I think I could,
but if you put them into larger categories, you get about 5 or 6.
I think I could. I was thinking about it the other day, and I think I could, and I don't know what they are now, so don't ask me. But I think I narrowed it down to like 2 or 3. And if you solved those 2 or 3 problems, it would have the chain reaction effect of making the other issues either not a problem or not as noticeable, right?
In 4th or in 5th?
And I think 5th did a nice job of recognizing those issues, and for the most part, resolving them and not repeating those issues. And I think that's been a positive change. I think 5th owes a lot to 4th edition that early adopters of 5th edition did not give it credit for.
Oh yeah, sure. The chat is saying that Jeff, your audio is harder to hear. You must be set your gain is a little low or something. It just might be so low compared to us.
It might also just be low. It looked like it was low. My kids use the computer all the time, so they might have messed with it.
So yeah, Mike, I don't know. I don't know what started that. But Brandis and I just got through with the big DMG, analysis thing, and that had a lot of 4E in it, of course.
Right.
And
yeah. Did you guys go over? I was just looking at the 4E DMG.
Yeah, so we did.
I'm trying to remember how they did encounter building.
Yeah, so we did an episode on the 1E DMG, got 1 episode. The 2E DMG got 3 episodes.
Interesting.
The 3E DMG got 1 episode. The 3E DMG 2 got a couple of episodes, right? And then the 4E DMG got 1 episode, and the 4E DMG 2 got 3 episodes, and that's the total 12.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because I'm not caught up yet. I think I'm in the DMG 1 from 4E right now. I'm on that episode.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting that both of you seem to agree that 3rd edition is your least favorite edition of D&D, but one of your favorite DMGs.
The 3rd edition DMG 2.
Especially the DMG 2, yeah.
I don't care for the 3rd edition DMG 1. It's not meaningful for me.
Because it's a lot of mechanics.
Yeah, well, and I never played 3E, so reading it is kind of like reading things that, I played, so when I say that, I didn't ever play any really long campaigns in 3rd edition. I played a handful of sessions where I was a player in different, like, 1-shots or 2-shots, right? Never a long campaign. And I ran like a four session campaign, little mini arc or something. And that's pretty much all I did. And I played Pathfinder a couple of times, and I ran a couple of Pathfinder, 3 or 4 sessions. So in that way I've done a little bit of 3E, but it just wasn't it wasn't in my life. It wasn't the right time for me to be playing third edition. I was playing other games. So it's not, when I say that I didn't play third edition, it's not because I looked at it and said, oh, screw this, I don't like the game. Right. It's just that I was in a place where I wasn't playing very much, and the games I was playing were not D&D. Mm-hmm. And so then by the time I wanted to get back into D&D and be gaming more, it was already like 2006 or 2007. And there were like 35 books out for third edition.
And because the
5, and I was like,
they put out they put out 2 books a month, one setting neutral book a month, and then one Forgotten Realms book every single month. Like, they published a ton of product.
And they did
4E was going at that rate too.
Did that too.
Not 2
a book a month.
Not 2 a month.
That was about a book a month. Yeah.
It was a book a month, but
a bunch of dragon
attention. That same problem though of that treadmill, right, was they're putting out so much. The thing with third edition is it was a. Oh, how do I see this? So I sound like I'm not ripping up fourth edition. Fourth edition was putting out books very quickly, and so number one, you couldn't use it all. Number two,
no one could
keep up. It wasn't very well play tested.
No.
So a lot of it was
the only thing that was well play tested was Essentials. Essentials, they basically took all the lessons they had.
They had years of play tests, right?
Right, but that's the problem, right? Though, but by the time third edition was sort of 3 or 4 years old, that stuff, not that they didn't make some over or underpowered things and a lot of feat traps and whatnot, but I don't know, it was more solid in terms of how you could fiddle with the math. It seemed like, but like I said, I wasn't playing the game, so that analysis could be completely wrong. But there were so many books out by the time third edition was really. When I was getting back into D&D, that I was like, forget it, I'm not doing that. And then fourth edition came out a year and a half later, and I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll get into it. So I was on fourth edition from the get-go, from the beginning of that edition. And so I could keep up with, okay, what's going on and how does it work and all that. And so I had a really good time with fourth edition. And I was telling Mike, for the audience, I was telling Mike earlier that one of the things I like about 4th it's not even so much the mechanics necessarily, it's the way that they did the world building and the way that the more things came out, you were learning more about the world, and you could learn about the world through play. And that really brought back first edition feels for me, right? Because in first edition, that's how I learned about Greyhawk, right? And in basic D&D, that's how I learned about Mystara, was playing those modules and, playing through the game and learning about the world through my character, not just, okay, there's 30 years of canon for this Forgotten Realms setting, and I never played the majority of it, but now suddenly here I am in this edition where that seems to be the main setting, and it's just not as meaningful for me because there's already so much out there. It's like not everybody's learning the world as we go. Like in 4th edition, if you were playing in the Nintir Vale, you're learning about the world as you go, and so was the DM, and so everybody was kind of on even footing. And for those late 3E days, it was like, okay, well, here's the Forgotten Realms. I haven't played in the Forgotten Realms since the gray box in first edition, right? So I don't know anything that's happened about it. And now here we are, and all the people sitting at the table know everything about the realms. And I know nothing. It's hard to run a game like that.
That's a common complaint with settings like the realms.
Theoretically, you can just say, well, make the world your own, whatever. And I get that, and I agree with it in general. But it's very different when you're sitting at a table with 4 Forgotten Realms experts, and you're trying to DM them through a game, and you don't know squat. It's just not. It's not as easy as it sounds. The theoretical idea of making the setting your own and making the world your own, that's great. But if you've got four really strong Forgotten Realms lovers and they know the lore and you don't, it's just not that easy.
I'll tell you this. So it's been years, probably, 5 or 6 years since I've looked at the encounter building rules in 4th edition. And I remember they were good. And I remember I liked them better than 5th by a fair margin. And I'm reading them again and I'm like, yeah. It's interesting. It's actually really interesting to look back on it now, comparing it to what 5th edition has, which is they basically don't care about the number of monsters.
Right.
The number of monsters aren't a consideration. It's just experience point value.
Right.
And that gets to what Dan Dillon was saying that he does for 5th, which is he says he ignores the multiplier in the DM and just uses experience outright, which makes for harder fights. But given that they're not accounting for magic items and feats and other optional rules, multi-classing, removing the multiplier is probably a pretty good idea, and I bet you it gets pretty close to what a deadly battle is.
I find I actually much prefer building encounters in 5e than 4e.
Than 4th? Really? I like the encounters better, but they're not as.
But I think it's an issue of style, because in 4th edition the math was very precise, which made it easy to know what was going to be good and what wasn't going to be good. What I don't.
Which made for cookie cutter encounters.
I don't know that I've ever looked at the encounter building rules for 5th edition. I just throw the shit at them that I feel like would be fun to play, and it works because the math is easier to deal with. So
and that's
it's
where
harder to fuck it up in 5th.
I was just reading the 4e DMG, and they say like you shouldn't run a battle where the monsters are more than like 4 levels lower than the characters because it'll be too easy. And I'm like, man, like who cares, right? Like the story dictates, and like
but
all the time I throw a couple bandits against level 9 party.
Yeah, but remember why 4th edition was designed that way. One of the big complaints about 3rd edition was that the CR numbers were all screwed up and the math was all screwed up, and it was really hard for a DM to create an encounter that was challenging. And if they did it, sometimes it would accidentally be a TPK that it wasn't because of the story, it was because of the messed up math. So, 4th edition addressed a lot of the complaints of the 3rd edition.
And they went back to those problems in 5th.
But differently though, right? Because in 4th edition, the reason why it was so structured is that you were relying on balance. And so it mattered if they said, well, don't throw an encounter that's 4 levels lower than your characters, because that is going to throw off the balance and it's not going to be fun anyway. And in 5th edition, you can run a little tiny skirmish with a very weak set of enemies in about 30 minutes and have that part of the story, and it works. Right. So while they threw away the numbers again and don't really care necessarily theoretically about the numbers, those numbers are a guideline. In 4th edition, that wasn't a guideline. That was here's how you build the encounter, and you should build it to these numbers.
In my experience, in 4th edition, if you didn't build it to those numbers, 4th edition was very much the game for me of the encounter was either a foregone conclusion. The PCs were definitely going to win, or it was going to be a TPK, and there was nothing in between. And that has not been my experience with in any other edition.
That wasn't my experience in 4E, but I always so the thing is, one of the things that when you get to the DMG2, when we talk about the DMG2, one of the things we say is, because those numbers are they get updated in the DMG2, that page 42 numbers, but the thing is, because it's such a strict adherence for balance, right? You're you're a little bit hamstrung by those numbers, right? They're like a straitjacket. So the way that you have to make sure that encounter isn't just totally boring is you use terrain effects and you use alternative objectives and stuff like that. And the reason why we like at least for me, the reason I like the DMG2 so much is that stuff also works for 5th edition. That's good advice for any edition, to make the encounter have stuff they can do in the battle other than just swing a sword.
That's something I find that outside of 4th edition, which required me to do those things in order to keep the combats interesting, I don't do it. I haven't done much of that in any other edition. Every now and then there'll be something, but in 4th edition, every encounter you had to do crazy extra things, alternative goals, weird, fantastic
I'm with you. I never do it either.
All that kind of stuff.
7 different variables in any given battle.
Which in fairness, it took a long time to prep, but I was only going to get through 1 encounter per session anyway, so who cares?
Right.
Yeah, but early on I changed the numbers and I made the creature hit points go really low and the monster damage go higher to speed up those combats. And I always offered a way to do something else in the encounter other than fight. So it got to where I could just do that very quickly. It wasn't it wasn't any harder to prep than a 5th edition fight for me. It feels like that's probably looking back a little bit with some not anti-memory, right? Like stuff I don't really remember the right way. But
hey, let me run. Go hit the bathroom before we start the actual show.
Okay, fine.
Okay.
I'll be right back.
But yeah, so I mean,
Nullzone is
whatever.
saying that they've tried to do it a lot, and the characters just don't interact with the extra environmental things. I've done it a few times in 5e when I've remembered to, and I find that my players, at least my adult players, will, once they figure out they can do something like that, they'll do it just because it's novel. And it's it's not just hit it over and over again.
Well, see, one of the things you're going to hear me talk about tonight is that I put my party were faced with something in my D&D brief game. They have to do something else. They were 12th level fighting a Baylor.
Right.
Like they're not going to win that fight. They have to do something else. And so of course they didn't even, it wasn't required that they fight the Baylor. The Baylor wasn't in the scene for them to fight. It was for them to have an obstacle, right? And so so I'm going to talk about that. So that they had an alternative objective that was because of the way they interacted with that creature, because of the setup. So yeah, I try to do that even in 5th edition because it's just fun. And also I just don't have that many combats in my game. So
I play tested a certain adventure from the Fantastic Layers product.
Wait, which product?
Fantastic Layers by
really? Where can I
Mike
find
Shea
it?
And James Intercasso and F. Scott Fitzgerald, available at sliferlurch.com.
Scott Fitzgerald Gray.
I knew I literally knew I was messing it up as I said it, but yes. But I play tested that what is it, the Frost Giant Werewolf,
Lair of Black Ice,
and it had some of that like interaction stuff in at least 2 of the 3 encounters. The first one, like,
and sometimes they come into play.
The first one, like, they saw that totem and they saw the glow in the werewolf's eyes, and they put 2 and 2 together. Yeah. And even though I did the math quick in my head, I that it was not going to be mechanically advantageous for them to take out the totems.
Yeah, we changed it. It's a lot easier to destroy those.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think I may have even suggested that, but.
But
yeah, I mean, it was not mechanically advantageous for them to attack the totems, but they did it anyway just because it was novel and different.
Right.
In the next one though, they have the chance to like knock over the rib cage, right?
Yeah. Or
they never did. They never even clued in on that being a thing they could do, even though I had one of the mammoths run in and knock one over on top of them. They just never picked up on that being a thing that they could or should do. So it just didn't come into play that time.
Right. Hey, Bex is here. Hey, Nullzone.
All right. And
let's do
Sam,
the show.
I don't know that 12
let's talk about some games.
characters can't take on a Baylor, but
oh, sure they can.
my
12th level?
My 12th level characters took out a CR 21 monster.
Yeah. I had like 9th level guys kill Orcus.
See? So, all right. Let's get actually started. We have talked successfully now for, I don't even know how long. What's it been? 20 minutes?
20 minutes.
And we haven't even started the recording. Let me hit record, and we are good to go. Y'all ready? All right. Welcome to Behind the DM Screen. It is January of 2021. We are 3 DMs talking about our games and helping each other out. And I'm Jeff Greiner. With us, as always, is Sam Dillon. Say hello, Sam.
Hello, Sam.
And also Mike Shea. Say hello, Mike.
Hello.
And that's us. That's the only introduction you get. Samuel, you are first on the list of talkers today. So we're going to dive right in. We're going to get into it. And you get to start. You have to stop talking to people in the chat on the Twitch.
I'll take over. I'll start talking to chat.
You have to stop talking to them on the chat room, but you can talk to them directly through 15 minutes of conversation about your game.
But I was having fun agreeing and disagreeing at the same time, apparently.
I'm starting the clock, though. Go.
Okay, so right now I'm running 3 games. Actually, that's not true. I'm running 4 games.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, so I have my Rime of the Frost Maiden game, and we actually ended up canceling the session because it was on Christmas and one of the players couldn't make it. And so we canceled that. So I think last time that we talked, I was either just going to run the next session or I just had run the last, I don't remember. But anyway, so basically my party made it to, I think I talked about this, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Oh my God, Mike Shea is saying really horrible misrepresentation of anything I would say.
You're talking right now. I'm taking over for you in the chat, and I've decided you think you're wrong about the Forgotten Realms, and that the Forgotten Realms is awesome. And so yeah, you just keep talking about your game.
Anyway, so my Frost Maiden game, the party made it to Tourmaline, and they went into the mine, and they fought all the creatures in the mine. And this is when the first time I was able to introduce the idea of Torog being involved in this situation, because in the mine, there's a kobold in there, and the kobold is so there's a ghost in there that has supposedly possessed the kobold, and the ghost does whatever. And so what I did was I changed it so that there's also the Mind Flayer skull in the mine. And so what I did was I had the kobold find the Mind Flayer skull and a psi crystal. And so the Mind Flayer skull had the psi crystal in it. And in that way, Torog was able to start communicating and influencing this kobold. And so the kobold found this satchel with like a manacle that had Torog's symbol on it and with a journal in it, whatever. All that's in the book other than the Torog part, right? And so basically, the party figured everything out, and they ended up killing the kobold, even though they started by negotiating with it, because it told them that all it really wanted to do was find a place for its and its comrades. It had like 5 or 6 other kobolds with it to live peacefully in Tourmaline, and like if the party could represent them and just whatever. But then the party told them, well, if you go live there, even if they accept you, you'll have to put your names in for the drawing for the sacrifice. So they said, okay, well, we don't really want to do that. So one of the party members is a Reghead tribesman and said to them, hey, my tribe will accept you. They're very accepting people. And so I can introduce you to them. And at first the kobold was like, no, I don't really want that. But how big is your tribe? And I think the player said like, oh, it's got 200 people or something. And the kobold piped up and said, oh, 200 people. Oh, I really that sounds wonderful. And then the party got suspicious. So they started like thinking, what the heck's going on? And then they started thinking, okay, well, if that's a Mind Flayer skull, maybe this thing is trying to get out and it'll infest the tribe and start taking over the tribe because it has some kind of relationship to a Mind Flayer. So they ended up killing him. But now they have a psi crystal, and the one of the PCs is probably going to attune to the psi crystal, and that's almost where we stopped. So they figured that out, and so that game is extremely fun. But my party is so all over the place that I'm constantly having to address and add new things and do different things. It's really not on a railroad at all, and this sounds like I just framed it as if it's a complaint. It's not a complaint at all. It's an extremely fun game. It's a great adventure. I'm really super enjoying it. But one of the things is because it's such a sandboxy type of adventure, my game is probably not like anybody else's, which is a benefit and a drawback, because that means that when people say, hey, how do I deal with this thing? The way I deal with it might not be the way somebody else would deal with it, because it's so reliant, because it's so sandboxy, it's so reliant on party dynamics and whatnot. So it's a good and a bad thing.
I find a little bit of that. I'm in like various Facebook groups for Curse of Strahd or Out of the Abyss or whatever, right? And, I find I've obviously like a lot of DMs go through a lot of changes to the adventure based off of
Mm-hmm.
the characters you have and the players you have, and other random things you want to throw in, like a play test for a fantastic layer that you want to make work. All these things make things change and make it unique and whatever. And yet I find that even on things that I've dramatically changed, like when I
Mm-hmm.
ran in my last Raleigh campaign, I ran that mashup of Out of the Abyss and the Rod of Seven Parts and Prince of the Apocalypse, and so that required
Mm-hmm.
massive change. And yet I still find that
Right.
there are some pretty relevant questions that come up, and
Yeah,
I
yeah,
can still
yeah.
speak to that. And even if I can't say this is how I did it, I'm at least very familiar with what they're talking about because I know what
Mm-hmm.
it was
Mm-hmm.
and how I
Right.
changed it. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things that I enjoy about
mm-hmm.
sandboxes. So that was all really my main point. So then I'm also running my D&D Brave game, which I already talked about. The party went through an infernal gate. They had to go and they had to negotiate with a devil because they want to get the use of two infernal gates because they figured out last time that in order to reverse the flooding event that's going on that catastrophically changed the world, the water has to have a pathway back to the blue plateau through the red plateau, which is basically hell, right? And so they needed to bargain with a devil to get the use of those two gates so that water can go into the red plateau and out of the red plateau without being reduced in any way so that they don't mess up other stuff, right? So they had to go in and bargain with the devil and make like contracts and so the devil of course has something that they want that it wants and that they had to go retrieve. And so I used 2C Gaming's Total Party Kill books. So they have their total party handbooks that have a bunch of encounters and whatnot. And so one of those is a sort of maze through this kind of demon devil infested area where there's darkness everywhere and they have to try to go through they're getting led through, but they're getting attacked as they go and they can't really see unless they have true sight. And so that was really super fun because it was just a way to like, give them some damage. And then they go and they talk to this devil, and this devil really wants this artifact that's being created. And the name of the artifact, I slightly changed the name from what's in the book, but it's the Ark of Sorrow. And so the devil makes a deal with them that he will open up a portal and let them go to this area called the Demon Forge, where there is a special magic item called the Ark of Sorrow being created. And it's really just a sword, but it has this special power and it's being created for a devil, but he wants it instead. The one they're negotiating with wants it instead. So they go in, and the way this is set up, there's a big Baylor that is trapped in there, and the devils in the forge are using the Baylor. This is out of the book. Using the Baylor as the power source for the forge because the raging energy of the Baylor that's trapped is stuck there. So the party goes in. I changed some of the devil type creatures that were in there, but basically they have to go in and they have to either just avoid the Baylor, who actually gets one of his arms loose and he uses the chain that was holding him as a big giant whip and whips it around and tries to kill everybody because it's just enraged because it's trapped. But they ended up actually talking to the Baylor and negotiating with it, and like it basically told them as they're here like fighting these devils, and it told them, if you set me free, like set me free, and you'll get out of here, right? Like you set me free and you'll get a chance to get out before I kill everybody in here. And so one player that was talking to, they were telepathically communicating, said, okay, well, if I just give me a couple of minutes and then I will unbind your chains, right? And so it said, it's basically, I mean, it didn't have a choice at that point, but they said, don't quit swinging that chain around, pretend like you're still trapped, and then I will break your chains in just a little bit, right? Because they had to get the weapon first. They couldn't leave without the weapon. So they get the weapon, they undo the Baelor. The Baelor rages, starts killing everything around. They had to fight a couple of the devils, but they were able to like orchestrate it so they could get through it, get out of there. And then they get back, and as they get back, they learn that the Ark of Sorrow was the weapon that they stole from. I mean, they basically took it. They kind of finagled their way, and they pulled like a heist. What they took was actually being forged for Glacia, and Glacia is the head of the sixth layer of hell and the daughter of Asmodeus, right? So they're like, oh crap, we just like made it so that we could like take this weapon. But so now, okay, we dealt with this devil and we got the thing we needed so that we could reverse the sinking. But now the queen of the sixth layer of hell is going to hate us because, of course, we just stole the thing that was being created for her for whatever purpose, who knows? And we gave it to this devil here who let us, that there's a gatekeeper devil. And so that it's a huge amount of fun, and it's really fun. But now like they're getting in so much deep crap. I mean, it's like they are, they're it's going to be in for them. I mean, like
that is a very different play style than what most of D&D Brief has been following. So I'm really interested when those sessions come out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so they spent 2 sessions when they went through this infernal gate. The first session was all going through that maze part and then negotiating with the devil. Then the next session was going into that forge. And when they went in, their plan was that they didn't know who the Ark of Sorrow was being made for, but their plan was to go in and negotiate with the crafts person, right? They didn't know who was crafting it, but they knew that there was a trapped crafts person in there. And basically they ended up, so there was a lot of negotiation because, the cleric couldn't really agree to sell anybody's soul, right? Including her own, because of course that would upset her deity. So the cleric couldn't do that. So there was this huge negotiation element to this, which is very much is in line with how they do things. Then they went into the forge and they tried to sneak around, and then they were talking to the bard was talking to the person making the weapon, and learns that this person making this weapon, they're doing it because they have to, but this thing is their magnum opus. This is the thing that is the best thing they've ever created. But as soon as it's done and they deliver it, they're going to be freed. Well, of course, now the party's about to steal it. This person's not going to get freed, right? So they're dooming this person, right? So they had a lot of choices to make in terms of, there's all kinds of consequences. And then when they get back, then they learn that it was for Glacia, and now it's like, oh crap.
I'm also intrigued by the whole concept of what is it? They're trying to find a way for the water from the blue plateau to basically go through hell and then come back out without losing water. Is that right?
Right. So when they wrote they found out from the Book of Proofs, based on different things that they wrote in there, that the way to reverse that you could reverse the sinking event, right? But the way that to reverse it was to take all the water that's coming into the common plateau from the blue plateau, and you have to reverse that. You have to close the rift that's in the blue plateau, which they did, right? They went planar hopping the last 3 or 4 sessions. They went to the blue plateau, they did a bunch of stuff, they closed the rift, and now they're hopping to the red plateau because the water has to go based on the way that the map, the vision of the way that all the plains are connected. The blue plateau is like a river that runs through all the plains. And so they have to seal the rift. Then they have to get the movement of the blue plateau going through the red plateau again. So they need that open so they can have the water go back the other direction.
I kind of like the idea of them establishing basically this river through hell, and having something go wrong. So basically your players are responsible for creating sticks. Right.
Right. So I don't know exactly what's going to happen there, but yeah, probably something's going to go wrong because Glacia is involved. As soon as she figures out that this is what happened, she's much more powerful than the gate devil, right? The gatekeeper devil. So she can immediately put the kibosh on the deal he made, right? Like she can make it so that that in by the letter of the contract, they fulfill, the devil fulfills the contract, but by the spirit of it, it doesn't get fulfilled, right? And so that's probably what's going to happen. There's going to be something that happens. Probably, it depends on what they do. So then I'm running 2 other games. I'm running a Castle and Crusades game, which I don't have time to talk about. But then I ran D&D the other day for my teenage players, which I haven't run for them in a long time.
Yeah, you haven't talked about them in a while.
Yeah, so I ran that because the pandemic happened and I was running that game in person, and then we ran a couple times online, and their computer systems just aren't all that great, and they're not really savvy with computers, so it was really difficult to do that. And then their school started back, so they just didn't have any time. So I ran for them on Tuesday, and I ran a mashup of the what is the name of it? The Temple of the Centipede Cult from Fantastic Layers, right? And a mashup between that and the Cathedral of the 10,000 Flames, which is from the Underworld Layers from the Kingdom of the Ghouls or Empire of the Ghouls by Rich Green, right? So, so I ran this mashup just because it was very nicely set up and super easy to put the cathedral from the Cathedral of 10,000 Flames as the above ground portion of it, and then under that is the Temple of the Centipede Cult, right? And just make the whole thing very eerie and all that. The party's 5th level, but there's really only 2 of them with 2 kind of sidekick characters. So running through the Temple of the Centipede Cult is extremely doable, right? They're not probably going to die at 5th level, but I can add or take away some elements and make that work really well. But the thing that happened that I was talking about in the Tome Show Discord was what happened was, so they got down and they were doing a bunch of stuff in the temple, and then they decided to go back up to the cathedral part because they hadn't looked at at all the rooms in there. And they get to this one room, and there's an empty coffin in the corner. And because of the way I had to change the map to make sure there were stairs down into the into the Centipede Cult temple, I made it so that I had already pre-planned beforehand that coffin was really just a teleportation area. So if you stood in the coffin or laid down in the coffin, it would take you to the room that no longer was really attached to those stairs, because I made the stairs go the other direction, right, to get down to the temple. So, but they see this empty coffin and they're like, "Oh, what is this?" And one of the players thought it was going to be a mummy. It's like, "Oh, mummies! There's going to be a mummy in here." And he convinces all the other PCs to light torches, right? So we're going to have to set him on fire when he pops out of there. And I'm like, mummies don't live in coffins. And he's like, "No, it's going to be a mummy. I know it's going to be a mummy. It's going to be horrible. It's going to be horrible." Because he's afraid of this mummy, right? It's going to be horrible. And I'm like, there's not going to be a mummy in there. Mummies don't live in coffins. What lives in a coffin? I don't know, but mummies live in coffins. I said, "No, where do mummies live?" And he says, he's thinking, he's 14, right? So he says, a sarcophagus. He lives in a sarcophagus. And I said, "Yeah, but that's in a mausoleum or in a tomb or in a crypt or in some kind of a castle." I said, "That's a that's a sarcophagus, like in a pyramid, right? But what's a coffin for? If you have a tomb with coffins, what's going to be in there? Not a mummy. What's going to be? Oh, maybe skeletons. Okay, maybe skeletons, but what else? I don't know, a mummy, but I just know it's going to be a mummy," he says. And I'm like, no, it's not going to be a mummy. What lives in a coffin? He honestly is like, "I have no idea." And I'm like,
"Show him."
A vampire.
Don't tell him. Show him.
Vampires live in coffins. And he freaked out. He's like, "Oh my God, a vampire!" But he got really excited because I guess he likes vampires, which I did not know.
Then how does he not know they live in coffins?
I think he just likes the idea of, oh, that's even more scary than a mummy, right? Like, he doesn't know, right? He doesn't know. They're very they're not really up on sort of typical tropes that a lot of people are, right? They're real protected by their parents, let's say. That's the nicest way to say it. They have a lot different experience than, they don't play computer games at all, and they don't have access to them at all, and they don't watch TV at all. They have books, but very different. the only books they read are ones approved by their parents. So, their mom doesn't let them read, Bram Stoker's Dracula, right? So, whatever. So so anyway, so basically what I had happen was, they started testing out this coffin. So they opened it and nothing was in there. And so they were kind of relieved, but then they thought, well, why is there nothing in there? So they started, they poked a 10-foot pole down there. And so what I said was, well, when you poke the pole in there, the half that you're poking in disappears. You can't see it. Mm. So they threw some stuff in, they threw a torch into the thing and it disappeared. And then the guy he was still holding on to the 10-foot pole. So he pulls it out and it's whole again. And so they realize, oh wait, so it's either it's like extra dimensional, or it's like teleporting, or it's doing something. And they decide it's got to be that's an extra dimensional space in there, right? Like it has to be like a pocket domain in there. And I said, yeah, but now you threw your torch in there, so whoever's on the other side knows that you're here. And they're like, oh crap! So they wrote a note, and they're like, hello. They wrote it was like an elementary school note, like, hello, we don't mean any harm, please don't hurt us, basically.
We like you. Do you like us? Check yes or no.
Yeah, do you like us? Click yes or no. Yeah. And so they ball that up and they throw it back. And so because the one kid was so excited about, oh my God, vampires, I had the return message from whoever's over there be a very nice sealed envelope with a wax seal stamped onto it and very nice calligraphy. And I had it be an invitation from Strahd. Right. And so it said, I'm very pleased to make your acquaintance. Thank you for visiting my other home. And, I would like to invite you to my castle to have a formal dinner where we can have a more civilized conversation, very, very tutti frutti, Strahd, fanciful language kind of thing. And I read this to them and I said, and it's signed by Strahd von Zarovich. And their brothers, the other one goes, oh no, I know that name. Oh no, this is horrible. So of course now I have to take them to Ravenloft, right? So that's where we ended.
It'll be interesting to start Ravenloft with the dinner. Session
Sure.
1 is you come out of the coffin and you're in the castle and Strahd, tells you to sit down.
Maybe you're on the table.
Yeah.
So you get out and all the vampires oh hey, they're here.
Well, so, and I don't know how, so they wrote a note back that said, oh, thank you for the invitation. We can't do it right now. We're kind of in the middle of something. So we'll be there as soon as we can. And they had tried to scramble to finish what they were doing. But so what I realized through this particular game was I was doing the exact same thing that I always give Jeff Greiner such a hard time about. And that is I mashed up so many different pieces because they started out this adventure in Dungeon of the Mad Mage. They started out actually in a smaller dungeon because they had said they wanted to go through some dungeons. And so I had them going through a smaller dungeon just to kind of teach them some dungeon crawly things because they had not done that previously. And so they interacted with the cult and whatnot. And then they ended up finding an entrance to the Dungeon of the Mad Mage, not through the Waterdeep Yawning Portal, but just one of the levels. It wasn't actually the whole, Undermountain. And then I had them, they were in a couple of towns in between and whatnot, and they had a bunch of interactions there and all that. And now they're back looking for this particular artifact from the very first session, and it led them to this place. So now I'm going to end up smashing up Strahd with this. So I guess I'm just as bad as Jeff.
Now, in fairness, and both to you and me, this is how people have been playing D&D since the beginning, right? I mean, you've got a published thing, right. You run it, and then the one time I ran that was different was during that Out of the Abyss, Princes of the Apocalypse, Rod of Seven Parts, because I ran them...
The 5 adventure mashup
I ran them all simultaneously, and that was a different... Right. I really enjoyed the experience. It worked really well, but... That's not the same thing as what you're talking about, or even what I'm doing in my current campaign, where you go Dragon Heist, Curse of Strahd, and then some other things where I'm ripping out dungeons of other that's just how D&D has always worked. So
I know. I just giving you a hard time about it, and recognizing that I suddenly was mashing up 5 different things, because the other thing that's going to happen is they're going to end up dealing with some of the Numenera stuff. So
Oh.
the beasts of blood and steel or what's the name of that? Beasts of Flesh and Steel, has some really interesting creatures, and that's all very like construct based kind of stuff.
Because
a
you've
lot
got
of
the
it.
5e, you got the 5e books. Is that what you're?
Yeah.
Yeah, Arcana of the Ancients and Beasts of Flesh and Steel. I've got right here.
Yeah,
I've seriously considered it, but I have so many different settings and so many different adventures. I don't have time to get to the things I have. So
yeah, well, see, that's part of why I'm doing this is because I ended up I had a big credit from Noble Knight Games because I sold them a bunch of my stuff, and I got the big Strahd, like the big coffin box thing that's super huge. And I haven't even opened it yet because I don't have the hardcover, right? Like I bought the hardcover when it first came out and I read it, and then I think we reviewed it, and then I got rid of it. I gave it to somebody. And so I went ahead and I was like, well, I have a credit. Maybe I'll get this, and because I want to see how they do with the soft cover and whatnot. So I got it, but I've just never opened it because I never had a chance. I'm always doing other things, right? And then I started thinking, well, if I run this game for them, and if I'm trying to negotiate with their mom to get like a regular schedule for it, because I can't run Strahd if I'm only going to meet with them once every 2.5 months. You know what I mean? That needs to be a more regular thing. So, but if I'm going to do that, then there's no way I'm going to get through everything I ever want to run. So I might as well just start throwing things in, which was part of that. So that's part of why that's the only chance I'll get to use the Beasts of Flesh and Steel.
And as we can discuss when it's my turn in a moment, that's largely why I'm ripping out the dungeons that I'm ripping out, because it's like, well, I don't know that I'm ever going to get a chance to run Tomb of Annihilation, but I kind of want to do the Acererak Deathtrap dungeon thing, so I'm just stealing it and sticking it in this campaign.
Yep.
So
yeah. So that's my roundup. So highly recommend 2C Gaming's TPK Beastries. They're really good. And
so they
back their Kickstarter.
Yeah, they have a Kickstarter going on right now for they're called Epic Tome of Titans, Epic Legacy Tome of Titans. And it's got 38 days left. I can't imagine running a Kickstarter for 38 days because every day is crazy stressful. Good luck to you, Ryan. Yeah. So hopefully it will still be going on by the time you hear the show on the podcast too. Good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we're not backed up, so we're
very good.
I'm just burnt out from editing 12 Days of Christmas, so next week I'll start releasing stuff again.
Yeah, there's a few. Did you ever? I don't know if you're completely up to date because we recorded like the Fit and book club right before the holidays when you started doing the 12 days. So I don't know if those have got out. But...
Yeah, so I don't edit the book club, so I'm reliant on Aaron for that. But all the fits and the BTDMS came out, so everything came out except for
And hopefully you and Brandis are taking a little bit of a break. Those were monster episodes. So.
Yeah, they're so fun though. I mean,
I'm having a blast with it. Another thing I can discuss tonight is some of the inspiration I got listening to you all talk about some things. Specifically, I ripped something almost completely out of the DMG2 from 3rd edition as you were talking about. I'm like, that's a neat idea, and you were kind of hot and cold on it. But I'm like, that's kind of a neat idea, and if I tweak it, it actually works really well with my sessions. So why don't I talk about our sponsor, AwesomeDice.com, and then we can get into all of that stuff for my game when I'm on the clock. Not that the clock matters much, because you were like 10 minutes over. So.
Well, I think I think Sam spent like 45 minutes, which means you've got 3.
Something like that. That's how that works.
Yeah.
So AwesomeDice.com is our sponsor at the moment. You should totally check them out. They are an awesome dice company. And my thing to highlight this time around is I am kind of really enjoying the fact that they have dice set up by class. So they have a catalog of dice, of course. And so they've decided that they're going to create sort of a curated selection of dice by D&D class. And so you can just sort of click on the Bard dice and see what kind of fun things they have, or the Druid dice. I like the Druid dice they have because they have one set that is what do they call it? They call it their skull dice because they're clear dice with little tiny resin skulls in it with a little bit of like cave moss stuck in there with it too, and it's kind of cool. And so they've got all kinds of cool dice, and they have a curated selection of them by D&D class. So check that out from awesomedice.com. Now it is my turn to talk about my game. Or games. I've been referring to the one game as my Curse of Strahd game, or before that it was the Dragon Heist game, which isn't helpful anymore because now I'm in the third act, which is my homebrew story sort of wrap up to the whole thing. And so I'm going to start referring to it as in the name that I've been using with the group since the beginning, which is Deep Darkness is the name of the campaign. Because, Water Deep and then Darkness of Barovia, I figured I'd mash them up, call it Deep Darkness, and it worked. So we're in Act 3 with that game. Since we last chatted, I think last time we chatted, they had just defeated Strahd and got out of Barovia, and Barovia merged with Waterdeep, and now Castle Ravenloft is up on the top of Mount Waterdeep overlooking the city, and there was all that stuff. And I think I talked about how some of my players, one in particular, was upset that there was a lack of treasure reward for having defeated Strahd and what have you. And then now we're into the Act 3, and Act 3 is they come down from the mountain, and there's a massive they described it as the containment unit from Ghostbusters exploding, all this energy shooting up into the air, right? And then I described these couple dozen-ish gray comets or shooting stars that go bursting out all over Faerun, and that is each of the dark powers in the Amber Temple. That now that it's here, and they've all been broken out of the Amber sarcophagi from Amber Temple, they've all found their own champions in the world and imbued them with Strahd-like boosts and bonuses, right? And that's where I'm pulling out a bunch of... I'm pulling out the legendary dragons stats. Green Ronin has the Book of Fiends and has some really powerful but interesting and unique monsters. And I'm pulling all these stats from different sort of third-party things and being like, okay, that's that's such and such who became this thing, which is the champion of this dark power, right? And obviously it would be cumbersome and a little tiresome to then say, okay, now go out and travel all of Toril to find and defeat all of the champions of the dark powers. Also because that doesn't actually ultimately solve the problem, because the dark powers are still out there. You just defeated the champion. Like when you beat Strahd, you didn't kill Vampire, who created Strahd, right? And so each of them, I used one of the characters, Warlock Patron, to give each of them sort of a vision of one of the comets that shot out, one of the dark powers choosing a champion. And so they have, and I tied them all to their own characters' backstories, right? So one of them saw a comet go down and crash into a ruined city in the jungles far to the south, right, in Chult. And it hits the necromancer that killed the halfling druid's family way back in his backstory, right? And turns him into a lich, and he sort of cackles and laughs and goes down into the dungeon under the city. And that is the dungeon from Tomb of Annihilation. And then of course I tweak the what is the thing that's sucking up all the souls in that adventure? Monger, the soulmonger.
Yeah. The soulmonger.
So instead of the soulmonger sucking up souls, it's sucking up the energy, the spirits of the champions to the dark powers as they defeat them, right? So every time one of them is defeated, it's sucking up all that energy so that Acererak, who was the necromancer, can sort of feed it into his own death god, instead of being like all the other dark powers trying to turn himself into a god and replace one of the existing gods of the Forgotten Realms. He's creating his own god that can sort of he can be the puppet master for, right? And so that's where they're going to be heading next. Right after it all happened, things kind of happened quick, because one of the players had taken a boon and had been in long communication with one of the dark powers. And so that dark powers comment actually hit him and offered to make him the champion. But I was clear with the player, like, if you say yes, this goes one of two ways. Either at some point you have to betray the party and become a villain, or you just immediately become an NPC. So just know if you say yes, your character is not really your character anymore. Like I just wanted to be, let them know about that because I didn't want them to be surprised. Oh, I don't get my character now? Yeah, so I didn't want to pull that on him. So he ultimately said no. One of the other Dark Powers actually chose the Castellanter kids from Dragon Heist. Their parents had done this thing where they lost their souls, right? They gave up their souls, and they're just sort of these empty husks of kids without souls. And so the players are like, well, we don't want to like deal with this, and so they gave them to the Temple of Tome, the Halls of Justice, and like you guys look after these kids. So I'm like, perfect. So one of the Dark Powers chooses them. They merge together into this giant two-headed monster that bursts out of the Halls of Justice and rampages like a kaiju through Waterdeep before teleporting away. Right? So that was super fun. And then a couple of other combats actually hit in Waterdeep too. One of them hit this rival of one of my characters. She has had this rival in her backstory from the beginning, and he's popped up 3 or 4 times, and they all just absolutely hate him because he just keeps, like, they can't kill him, and he just keeps escaping. Like, I built him with all kinds of teleportation spells and whatever, so he can always find a way to escape, right? And and so at the end of Dragon Heist, they finally caught him. They gave him over to Laeral. She bound him and took away his magic and whatever, and they stuck him in a prison cell. And then this Dark Power hits him. He accepts, and the Dark Power breaks him out of the prison. And so, now we got to deal with him again, right? And so as they're on their way back to Trollskull Manor, like they still haven't even made it home after coming back from Barovia. And then they're attacked by one of the champions in Waterdeep. There's one that's like the Hellhound Whisperer. And it's kind of a silly one, so I'm like, that's a good like first fight, right? This doesn't need to be a major story point, but this one was chosen, and the Dark Power is like, these guys are going to be problematic. Go kill them quickly while they're still reeling from the fight with Strahd. And so they fight off that one, and it was tough because the stat block I pulled for him that I thought was kind of interesting that I reskinned was from Book of Fiends and was like a CR 21 creature, and they're like level 12. They won, but it was a tough fight, and I had a couple of them on the ropes. And the one player was gone that night. The one player that was hit by his comet that said no to his deal becoming a champion. I had it work a little differently with him, where the Dark Power hit him, and then he just kind of went into a coma, and that was my way of dealing with the fact that player wasn't there, and I'm not going to have the consequences of that choice happen if the player's not there to make the choice. And he's also their heavy hitter, so not having their heavy hitter made that fight a little bit tougher, I think. So they defeated that champion. They got back to Trollskull Manor. They found out about what happened with the Castellanter kids. They went to go check out the temple and see where they could help out. They did some of that, and the creature was gone, so they went back home again. And as they got back home, it's like, oh, holy crap, like things are crazy. What are we gonna do, and where are we gonna go next? And we should probably go down to this jungle in Chult because this character's been looking for this guy for his entire life, and now he's got a chance. But we should go take care of that. Plus, they saw the gray comet shoot out of the one that they killed and fly far to the south. So they suspect what's going on there, and then the rival, his name is Xeres, sort of steps out of the shadows in the middle of Trollskull Manor and says, well, you could go do that, but I think first we have some things to deal with, right? And so they have this big epic fight with him. And then and as that sort of wrapped up, I decided that I've tried to seed sort of Easter eggs in this campaign to Descent into Avernus, because as soon as we're able to play back in person, when this campaign's over, we'll be doing that one. And so I seeded this idea of infernal contracts. Plus, the one character is a tiefling from Dis, so she's been talking about contracts and making deals with devils and that kind of stuff since level 1. And so I had an imp show up and be like, I hear you're all going out to do something very, very important. And you've got a lot of money, but you're not very well equipped because 5th edition is such that you don't just have magic item shops sitting around, right? It's not 4th and 3rd where getting lots of magic all the time was necessary to keep up with the mechanics of the game. But my players, one of my players, I think, is primarily used to 3rd, and so that chafes him. So I gave him an opportunity. Like, I will send you to the greatest magic item shop in all of the planes. And you have to sign this deal. And you don't have to give up a soul unless you break the deal. You don't have to give up a soul or anything. It's just, you're going to be going up against one of these new champions. It's a pit fiend named Gargoth. You have to promise me you're not going to kill it. You have to, like, find a way to bind it. Right? Because I'm setting them up to creating the shield, because this devil they're making a deal with wants them to create the shield because they want the events of Descent into Avernus to take place, right? And so two of them signed. Yeah, sure. And then one of them goes off, and he has, in between sessions, he's had a big, long, like, we've got all that money from Dragon Heist, and we've picked up money in Barovia. We've never had a chance to spend any of this money. What are we doing, right? Now I'm in a magic item shop, and they can get literally anything. They don't know this. This is a magic item shop that has been in campaigns that I've run, and that my old high school friends ran, going all the way back to 2nd edition. And it's sort of a reoccurring, like, this is a place in Sigil. And it's run by, at the time we had it run by, was it Beelzebub, the Prince of Lies? But you pulling out from Kobold Press, I forget which book it is, Tome of Beasts maybe? I pulled out Mammon and decided it's actually being run by Mammon, because that makes sense for a shop keeper, right? So there's an archdevil running a magic item shop in Sigil, who will totally, like, he's on the up and up. He won't lie to you. He won't cheat you. He's totally gonna, like, sell you whatever you want, and he has access to every magic item below legendary available if you can pay the price for it, right? Now, did you just take an item from a devil who can now use that to scry you anywhere in the planes? Sure. But we probably won't actually have to deal with that. We'll see. Right? And so we did this whole, like, I mean, it was a long, like, he spent 6 hours in game there, and did this whole shopping trip. And I gave him the opportunity, like, if you want to spend, he will let you, for 100 gold, take the time to whittle down and choose the very specific item you're looking for, because your character doesn't know, like, the names of the magic items in the DMG. So you can't just say, I want a +1 sword. That's not a thing your character knows. But if you want to, like, take the time to whittle it down and make it work with this guy, he'll charge you 100 gold for his time. But then he'll do that, right? And then you can just give me the list of everything that you want, as long as you spend 100 gold per item just to ask for it. Or you can say, I want an item that does this, and see what you get, right? And he only allowed that twice. He only let me be creative twice, so I tried to be really creative. And I pulled, he's like, I want a dagger that does more damage, right? Okay, fine. And so I found, I modified the Shark Tooth Blade from the Caesar Verdari campaign setting that Branda Started worked on. And then there was another one. And then they didn't end up buying that one. But so I tried to come up with fun and creative ones for those few that they didn't just give me the list, right? So they went shopping, and that was in between sessions. We didn't play one session because it was Christmas Day, and then we didn't play last Friday. We were all looking forward to it, but then there was an ice storm, and one of the players wasn't going to be able to make it. Two of the players lost because they lived together, lost power during the ice storm, and then it's like, well, now we're down to just 2 players, and so at the last minute we canceled last Friday's game. So this next session, they're heading down into Chult, and they're going to, I'm going to layer in a little more, because Descent into Avernus has a cameo from, what is it, Captain Portier, who you could possibly meet in Tomb of Annihilation. Do you remember that, Mike? You played that adventure.
I don't remember that.
She was the Flaming Fist captain.
Oh, yeah, right, sure. Yeah,
and she shows up in Descent into
right.
Avernus. She, like, comes back to replace Older Ravengard, right? So I'm gonna, and then there's also the.
She died in my Tomb of Annihilation game.
So I'm gonna have her, like, be outside of the tomb with some Flaming Fist that had chased some creatures here that had kidnapped one of their superiors who had come to inspect the camp or whatever, and I'm gonna have that be. Alder Ravengard, who will be the NPC in the sarcophagus after the Atropol. I don't know how far if they went to that part, right? Because you could, I imagine, just sort of walk out of the adventure from there. But But yeah, so if they get there, that's gonna be the NPC, not somebody who's important to them now, but a little cameo of somebody who's gonna be important later on. And so I spent a good amount of time over the course of a week or so taking all of the maps and tokens and whatever and preparing Tomb of Annihilation in Roll20, and getting that all set up. And then I figured that one. The idea is that from defeating that champion, Acererak, not only does this accomplish something for the one character personally, but from that one they can learn how to call the dark powers, right? The soulmonger is pulling their energy from all over the world. So from that they can learn how to call the dark powers. And then the other one, when they go after Gargoth, I've talked about this a little bit on the Discord. I'm gonna have basically Gargoth. They're gonna be in Elturel. Gargoth is gonna be going after the champion, and I'm gonna use the mass combat rules, and there's gonna be like a fight going on down below, and the PCs are specifically supposed to use the cover of that to go and free Gideon Lightward, who's been captured by Gargoth's cult. And all of that to distract or to get Gargoth's attention enough to get him to leave the companion alone and come down and deal with them, so they can do the ritual to trap him inside of the celestial shield, which will create the shield of the Hidden Lord. I need to set up all of that now that I've got it all figured out. But it's all kind of coming together, and once they get once they could get that, now they know how to bind in an appropriate item. They know how to bind a dark power, right? You combine the two of them. I can now call dark powers, and I can now bind dark powers, and now they can basically go to Amber Temple and use the sarcophagi and re-trap the dark powers whenever they are up for it, right? Instead of going around and hunting all of them and then waiting for them to come back and what have you. But they can still go out and hunt down whatever ones they want, and so we can just sort of play it from here at that point. And then I mentioned earlier that I was inspired by the conversation that Sam and Brandis had from DMG2 3rd edition during the 12 Days of Edition Wars. And it was the companion spirit idea that I liked, because there's the poltergeist, the spirit in Trollskull Manor, that one of the players became really close to. And then in Barovia, I had that spirit Leaf be affected by the powers of Barovia, and he was being called by the darkness of Strahd and the land of Ravenloft and all that kind of stuff, right? But he was a mirror for the one character who was also kind of being tempted to darkness and whatever, and he was like, I'm gonna keep fighting, I'm gonna hold out, and I'm gonna hang on to who I am, and I'm not gonna fall down this path, right? And that was my way of having this really intense role-playing scene with them, where they got to reflect on their decisions as a character and whether or not they were going to be tempted, and it worked out really well and what have you. And so now I think in the next session tomorrow night, Leaf is going to give them the opportunity. There were these 3 NPC Star Elf sisters who helped protect the manor that they had hired as staff, who'd they're basically the weird sisters from Shakespeare or whatever, who just sort of showed up and be like, oh, we should work here, there's a destiny and we need to be here right now. And so they stuck around. They did this thing that protected Trollskull Manor while they were in Barovia, and then when the manor came back from Barovia, they're like, all right, well, we've fulfilled our destiny, bye, right? But I'm going to say that Leaf sort of learned from them sort of what is keeping him in this world, and how he can use what he's learned to sort of reinforce the bond that they have together as a group, that they've developed together as a group. And so I'm going to use the companion spirit concept that you all talked about in the 3rd edition DMG2, and I chose one where all of the abilities that it grants them is based on the teamwork, based on the players sort of nothing gives you a benefit for you. It's all a benefit that you grant other people in your group, and so it sort of helps push that concept, especially because this group we had to kick a player out because he just wasn't gelling with the rest of the group at all after a year or so, and finally other players just got, I'm like, I'm used to playing with 12-year-olds, so I can deal with whatever, right? But some of the other players were just not okay, and so we had to ask him to leave. And this is after he'd gone through 3 characters, and everybody else had been playing the same person from the beginning. And so now is the time to sort of talk about how do we come together and gel as a group now that the sort of those distractions are gone. And so I'm using that concept for Leaf. I wrote it up today, actually, so it's all statted out all the way through tier 5 if they choose to invest into the ritual to strengthen that bond. So it'll be fun. But my big revelation, having finished Curse of Strahd, which I just bought the module on Roll20, to moving into preparing Tomb of Annihilation, is if you're not just buying the module, it is a lot of work. My prep time is significantly longer now. Now I think I've finished up Tomb of Annihilation's dungeon, and I've got all the maps, I've got all the dynamic lighting, I've got all the tokens ready to go. Like, everything is there and it's done and it's ready to go. So it'll go really smoothly for however long it takes them to go through that dungeon now. But it was a good solid week of spending an hour or 2 a day getting it to that point. And at the same time, like, my players are such, they're not gonna allow me to run a campaign just theater of the mind on Discord or whatever. That's not the kind of play they want to get into. It's going to be, this last bit of this campaign is going to be a little bit of work, but hopefully I can keep up. Right now it's easy because I'm on winter break, so I got time. We'll see what happens when I start writing articles, or I've got a grant proposal to work on and all that other stuff. So yeah. Online play using Roll20 is just requiring a lot more prep time than.
Yeah, I hear that a lot.
So there we are. It is what it is, and that's part of the sacrifice of living in a pandemic, I guess.
Well, it depends on your play style. I'm not spending a lot of time on maps. I'm playing a lot.
In my group, that is the play style, and so it's taking me a lot more time. Yep.
Sure. Yeah.
All right, Sam, you got to take off and deal with something. Are you taking off, or will you be back? Do you think?
I probably will not be back. To be
honest. Luckily,
Just,
you've already had your chance to chat.
Next time when Sam's going, I'll take off.
So there you go. Yeah.
Sorry, Mike. I didn't do it on purpose. Drama.
Go deal with that. Mike, I'll listen intently and give all the best Sam style advice that I can to Mike.
Awesome.
You're going to lavish praise on Forgotten Realms.
Yep. And people are missing out if they don't love the realms. It's not real deep.
Forgotten Realms is fantastic, and Dungeon of the Mad Mage is not an adventure.
Yes, that's
right. All right. Well, that rounds out my night. Okay. All right, guys.
Bye.
See you later.
Take care, Sam.
All right. Before we let Mike talk, though, I should mention that other ways you can support the show besides using awesomedice.com is you can go shopping at Amazon or DM's Guild. There are links at thetomeshow.com to get you there, or you can support us directly as a patron over at patreon.com/thetomeshow. Those people are supporting us directly, and we appreciate them fantastically. Some of them, I think, are in the chat watching us on the stream right now. So there we are. All right, Mike. I know you need to take off and eat ice cream or pudding or something tonight.
No, I'm good. I had my dessert before the show.
Okay.
Cookie bars. Wife made cookie bars.
I thought it was brownies or something. I had a handful of.
They're like it's the shape of a brownie, but it's cookie stuff.
I had a handful of peanut butter M&Ms. So, we as a family received this giant bag for Christmas of peanut butter M&Ms.
This doesn't count as my time.
I have not started.
While you're talking about M&Ms.
We got this big family bag of peanut butter M&Ms, and my wife and I have already dug into them and eaten 80% of them, and I don't think the kids have had any yet. So.
Right.
All right, Michael. I am putting a firm 15 minutes on the clock. No going over.
I'll see if I can stay to it, because I got some Harry Potter.
Well, clearly take whatever time you need to take, but I know you usually have a hard out time you got to go. So, all right, the time is yours.
So I'm running 3 games, and I have 3 conclusions all happening roughly the same time. I'm in the final chapter of Descent into Avernus, And both of my Eberron games are getting close to their final conclusion. My Wednesday game, I think, is now they just kicked in the door to the big final battle. And I expect that we'll have like a session of big final battle. And then I talked to them about having like a session of aftermath, right? Like kind of cleaning all the loose ends that occur. Like just having the battle and ending a campaign kind of is a little short, I think, when you've had like a year-long campaign. Yeah. It's almost nice to have an epilogue, right? Let's spend a whole session. You're talking to NPCs. You go back to Sharn.
I usually try to give like after the final battle of a campaign, I try to make sure there's like an hour left of the session, so I can sort of do an epilogue and.
I might consider doing. We'll see how it goes, but I may be willing. I may like to do like a whole session.
Yeah, I mean, if you
you
got stuff to do.
But I'll tell you, it didn't sound like the players are super interested in that. So I don't know. We'll see. They're kind of eager, like, I kind of like to start Frostmaiden. Okay. So we'll see. Yeah, so that I'll probably talk about the Eberron game, and then my Avernus game. I'm in the final chapter, and I think I probably only have a couple, maybe 2 sessions left of that, like tomorrow, and then one more after that. And then that game, the DM chair is going over to one of the players, so I'll be able to relax and just play D&D every other week instead of running it all the time.
You know what you're gonna
play? Nope, no idea. Something D&D.
Oh, interesting.
Right. Yeah, I asked for nothing too weird. I want to play like good old traditional D&D.
You want to kill goblins and...
Yeah, true. What I refer to as true D&D, which of course we know to be Forgotten Realms.
Yes.
Right.
The best setting.
I got to say that. The only way to really play D&D.
If you're not playing the Forgotten Realms, you're not playing D&D.
You're not playing Forgotten Realms. Yeah, you're not really playing D&D. Thanks. Hi, Sam.
Watch, he'll edit that out.
Yeah, right.
We forget he's the editor. He has ultimate control about what comes out.
He edited himself in. Like Greyhawk. So, so my Eberron game is closing in on the end. And I'll tell you, like, running a homebrew campaign and then getting to, like, the conclusion of a homebrew campaign is stressful. Right? Like it's you want to kind of make sure that final situation and the final thing that's going on is going to be a good conclusion. And there's always, like, I already sort of have some good thoughts in my head, like twists in the plot line are fine if it's not the last thing that happens in a game. I.e. Game of Thrones final episode, right? Like you don't want to just change everything all of a sudden. Give people what they want, right? Like they want a conclusion, we're going to give it to them. And I'll tell you, like, another dirty trick that I'm doing is I think there's no fewer than 4 bosses in the final battle. So instead of having like one boss and then they're just going to nuke that one, they've got 2 of the 3 daughters of Sorakel and their longtime villain Leto Skal, an Oni mage. And they don't know this, but Leto Skal's right hand, a Lamia enchanter named Valentine, survived being shot through the head because she's a Lamia and they're cursed, and they just resurrect right on wherever they were cursed from.
The thing is, if bad guys, if NPCs die and you want them to come back, the world has resurrection, and other people have it besides PCs.
In this case, she's almost suicidal because she's like 20,000 years old and she cannot be killed. When she's killed, she returns back to her cursed temple. The secret is Leto Skal moved the temple from where it was to Sharn, so now she resurrects in Sharn all the time, and she did back then too. But she's been lurking around, so they don't know that she's going to show up. But we'll see how that goes, because they're like, I shot her in the eye, like that. That she should have been dead a long time ago. It's like, she's back. So that might be a little bit of a twist that they don't like. But then they get to kill her again, so that's fun. So I got lots of bosses. It's a great big, like, they're making the weapon. I defined the weapon. I finally made it, instead of like noodling around on what the weapon of mourning is for Eberron, I said I know what it is. And spoiler, in my game, the weapon of mourning is a living wish spell. Oh. So they have these like living spells in Eberron, right? Well, the whether or not the original weapon was that, the new one is them capturing a living wish. And then they can use that living wish to basically do whatever they want, right? It's almost like...
What did the living wish do that caused the mourning?
I think the ritual was disrupted the first time. Basically, what I did is it was a Chernobyl event. So there was a portal. The final location is a place called Claw Rift, which is this huge, huge constructed facility beneath the city of Making, which is, kind of in the center of Mornland. It was in the center of Sire, sort of like one of the national labs, Los Alamos, like one of the national labs where they basically were building, like where the Manhattan Project was taking place, right? It's like a city in the middle of nowhere where everybody that works there, everybody that lives there is working on the bomb, right? So everybody in Making was working on the weapon, and it was hidden away from all of the other nations. But then it went bad. And so the Chernobyl event was like, the basic idea is they built it in Making because deep down under the ground was a city even older than the Dakani, the Goblin Empire. The Goblins had built a city around it because they found it. And then the Galifar Empire built on top of that, and then Sire built on top of that, and now the new group is coming in. So there's these layers of civilizations. But if you go deep enough, there was a portal down there that could connect to multiple worlds. It was sort of like a multi-point. I forget what they call them in Eberron. There's a name for like weak spots between the planes,
which is a big deal in Eberron because Eberron connections to other worlds and other planes is tougher to do.
Depends. Right. So some of them are more, they have these things called manifest zones, which are like weakened barriers between worlds. But there's one manifest zone that they don't have anymore, which is to Dalcor, the dream world. And so that's been sort of a big theme in the campaign too. So now there was this ancient portal down there that you could tap into basically all of the planes at once. And you could draw energy from these other worlds and use it for stuff. So they were using it back then to fuel the weapon. They had a huge dragon shard. They had this unlimited source of energy, and then they had magic spells where they could bind that energy into a weapon. And it didn't work the first time, and it blew up the portal. The portal shattered. So now there's this huge raw rift that's like pouring energy into the world, and it was so bad, like it turned a bunch of soldiers into glass, and it, destroyed the whole Mornland, right? But there's this like giant center pillar of energy pouring in, which is just like, the blown reactor. I watched Chernobyl, and the big blown reactor, and if you look at it, you just melt. And so the new group is going down there, and they're like, we're going to, the energy is still there. It's unbound, but we can still use it. And we have the magic, and we have these huge dragon shards. We're going to do it. And we're going to get the Droam, who's the monstrous nation, is the one that's trying to accomplish it, because if they can get the weapon, they could become a ratified nation, according to the Treaty of Thronehold. Like, this is if I have the bomb, you're not going to screw with me, and so there was a lot of interesting like talk about, well, what happens if they get it? Will they use it? And like, I mean, if they use it, they'll lose it, right? So they don't want to use it, but like, well, everyone else will go to war against them if they have it. And like, yeah, but what kind of war are they going to run if they've got a weapon like that? So a lot of fun, like what happens if the Droam gets the thing. But it does play into that. We were having the conversation earlier about like, what is a 4th edition D&D battle like, where you've got like the 7 variables, you've got monsters and terrain and environmental effects and weird tchotchkes and doodads that you can mess with that do things, what Dave the Game called the out, the idea of like, what's the way to end the battle before everyone's dead on one side. And and I'm thinking about it like, one of the things I recommend in Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master is that like you can ad lib just about everything in D&D except boss battles. And boss battles, you actually have to take some time and make sure you get them right. Like the balance has to be right. It's why we did Fantastic Lairs, right? Like the premise of Fantastic Lairs was boss battles are hard, so we're going to do the heavy lifting for you, and now I have to do the heavy lifting for my own game.
Available today at slyflourish.com.
It is not available today. People, you can sign up to be alerted when it's available. The PDF was sent out to Kickstarter.
I know I have it, and I assumed that it was available then.
The good citizens who back the Kickstarter have the PDF of it, and we have a few things that we want to finish up and make sure is absolutely solid before we make the print on demand copy available, because we don't want people's print on demand copy to be messed up. And then the whole thing will be for sale once we have everything available. So once the print on demand and the PDF and EPUB is out now too. I don't think that's like a stealth release. If you go and download it again, you'll get the EPUB version too. For those who like EPUB as an option for ebooks, nice to have it on your phone. So yeah, so trying to like think about that battle, and I was really stressed out. First of all, I was stressed out anyway, and then we had the events of yesterday, and now I'm really stressed out, and I got to run a
near
D&D.
DC.
Yeah, 20 miles away from me. So, I mean, not that, it wasn't a big deal, but like one of my friends who was on the call was like, "We're curfewed here,"
Yeah.
like so yeah, it was a little freaky. So I said, like, I'm just going to run a short game and I'm going to end it before the big battle. And that way I don't have to worry about the big battle, and they had some fun stuff. Like I'm doing like the shoveling in every NPC they've met. It's kind of funny. Like you're in the middle of the Mournland in this wasteland, in this ruined city. And there's this, huge rift and hey, all your friends are here, right? Like, hey, Cavella, your friend from the Dask, she's here. How'd she get here? Well, she came with the Droam. So I had sort of a triple agent show up, like the head of the Dask, the criminal arm of the Droam and Sharn, ended up becoming an ally of the characters, but then got brought back to the Droam, and now she switched again and told the characters everything about what's going on, and now left. Right? She's like, I'm hoping to get out of here.
Yeah, I've been over winter break. I usually pick a video game that I've got because it's the only chance I have to really play stuff, and I've been playing Knights of the Old Republic too.
Yeah, is that it's not Nebron, is it?
No, it's Star Wars.
I still forgot. Oh, Knights of the Old Republic. I'm thinking Neverwinter Nights. Sorry. Which of course is forgotten.
Right. But there, I finished it the other day, which is good because then literally the next day my laptop died, which is it's 10 years old. It was time, but the end as you're cycling up to the end of it, there's like a certain point where it's like now all of a sudden you're not allowed to pick which characters are in your party because everybody gets their own little spotlight. All of the security officers from every world you visited are suddenly on this space station to help out with this battle because it's that scene that you're talking about. Like for whatever reason, every NPC with a name that you've met in the entire game shows up in these last two locations so that you can see them. And there was one spot where like the main character is barreling forward into the Sith temple or whatever to finish the whole thing and whatever. And there's this little side story with one of the characters that you have in your party, and you have to play her every now and then. And I'm like, okay, well that means I'm going to run into her and I'm going to be able to start forming a party again. I'm not going to have to like solo the end of the game. No, you do have to solo the end of the game. They just wanted to give that one character a little bit of a spotlight because otherwise she didn't have anything at the end. So.
Yeah, it's like Mass Effect 3. Where kind of later when they were kind of trying to fix it up after it was released, and they added a party. So it's like you're getting ready to do the big final battle, and then you have like a house party, and all the characters are there, and you're like sitting there.
Just an excuse to see everybody and remember,
An excuse to see everybody. And I remember like I went through 2 runs of Mass Effect of all 3 games, and in one of them, I played like a paladin where I tried to make every moral right choice I could make, and I think everyone survived except one person. And then the other time I went the opposite, and it was me and one other guy at the party. Everyone else had been killed, and I'm like, I've got like the crazy red veins and the red eyes across my face. I'm like, yeah, sucks about so and so, huh? And the one other character that I don't think can die.
So how are you going to justify all of these NPCs showing up in the Mournland where nobody goes?
So it's really only I think that was it, right? Like I think like the NPCs that were showing up was Cavella, who is the head of the Dask, and it made sense that she was, nobody had a problem with the idea that she was brought in because the daughters brought her back in. They knew she had betrayed them, and they brought her in and said, you're getting close to us, and your brother's here, and he tried to betray us too, which means you guys are now going to go down to the Claw Rift and make the weapon for us, and so the other trick is I have this whole other angle that I threw in, which are these sentient crystal balls known as the emissaries. The emissaries, there's 7 of them, and I think 3 of them are now in play. 2 of them will be in the final scene, but 3 of them are in the city, and like how to work their storyline in while everything else is going on is going to be tricky. It's a whole it's a lot of variables going into one battle of like what happens when they start pulling out their sentient orbs and the orbs start doing Evard's black tentacles on everybody. Yeah, it's gonna be a wild ride. So the nice thing is I'm running it for 2 groups, and my Wednesday group is probably 2 sessions ahead of my Sunday group, which means I will try it with the Wednesday group and see how things go, and then I'll know how to tweak it for the Sunday group.
And there's a degree with your with wanting to do an epilogue, maybe a whole epilogue session, right? That if all of those things don't tie up in the final encounter, you can
this other.
Yeah, you can. The sentient orbs didn't get pulled out during the final battle. That's fine, but let's tell a little bit of a story, and maybe there's purposely and who knows what trouble they went on to So, you can still leave a little bit of a tantalizing tease. Like there's more to the future, but because the world time doesn't stop when your campaign is done. But
yeah, the one of the funny things that happened was. They went in and they've gotten beat up pretty heavily on their way down there. And there was no chance for a long rest before the fight. So they're going in like with scraping the bottom of barrel of their spells. And they're, they use up every hit die. And they're like drinking every health potion they've got. They're like, we'll buy more when we're done. Right. We're either going to be dead, in which case it won't matter if our health potions are around, or we'll go buy more when we're done with this. And one of the players said, "We are dangerously close to the recommended number of encounters per day in the in the Dungeon Master's Guide," which cracked me up.
Right.
Because nobody actually makes it to the to the it's like 12 to 14 encounters a day.
Encounter day, they had 2 encounters, but
right now this
one of them was that badass CR21, and then the other one was the rival who came to kill them because he's been trying to kill him since level 4 or whatever. And that one I also used a reskinned stat block from Book of Fiends that was like CR23. And he's like, well, you just barely survived fighting this other person. Of course I'm going to attack today. Why would I wait?
Yeah, right. I'm going to wait till you're burnt down. Yeah. So it's the other thing is when you have villains, like I've had this villain Leto Skal who's like super, super smart. This Oni spy that's worked for the Droam and he worked for the Aurum and he, ran his own thing and he ran expeditions into Zendrek for a long time. And so he's like a crafty guy. And the idea that like they're just going to go beat the crap out of him. It's like, well, he wouldn't put himself in a situation, but he doesn't know they're coming, right? Like they're busy making this thing. It's like, you're here? Like, we're like 3,000 miles away from, Sharn. I thought I left you there. You're coming in here, you can punch me in the face. So yeah, so that's it's good. It's kind of interesting to kind of finish up 3 campaigns all at once. And then we're moving off to Rime of the Frostmaiden. I did my one-page.
The 2 Eberron groups are going on their Frostmaiden, and then
both
the other one is somebody else DMing.
The other one, one of the players is gonna pick up the DM. My friend of mine, he's an excellent DM, and I've played in his games before, and so he volunteered, and I said, yeah, sure. I don't get to play in a campaign, so it'd be nice. And I have if I decide like, I'm kind of miss DMing that, it's like, I don't think I'll have any problem firing up another game.
And you already have.
So
how could you miss DMing? You already have 2 other games going simultaneously.
In case it's like, I miss doing 3 games a week.
Like that seems likely. Although
I never know.
What is it? Ishmael?
I'll tell you, there was a time there where like I was running playtests for Fantastic Lairs, Avernus, and 2 Eberron games, and it wasn't that there were a couple weeks where I was running 4 games in a week, and that was too much.
Ismail Alvarez, who does our social media, at least he helps with Facebook posts and that kind of stuff. Regular guest. I don't know if you've met him before, but when the pandemic hit, he went from like 3 or 4 games at a time. I think he's up to like, I don't know, 9 campaigns he's running simultaneously right now. I'm like, that is insane. You have more games than you have days of the week. I don't know. They must not all be weekly, so I don't know how he does it all, but
yeah, it's not. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, light prep. You can't do 4 Roll20 games.
All of his games are Roll20.
Jeff Kreiner style.
Yeah.
Really? Are they all pre-published adventures?
I don't know. He's the one that helped me figure out how to do Roll20. So.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, I'm both looking forward to, and I'm a little apprehensive about Frostmaiden. I think it'll be fine, but I guess it just hasn't grabbed me yet, right? The theme of the adventure just hasn't quite grabbed me.
I've my initial impressions,
and I think I'll get there.
Impressions of Frostmaiden were really negative, and all of
Yeah.
my criticisms, I think, are still there, but there's enough interesting stuff that I'm kind of reconsidering whether or not I might want to fix it and still run it someday. Which,
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, part of it is, capitalism on my part that like, when I run a published adventure, particularly one that's as popular as like Descent into Avernus or Rime of the Frostmaiden, and I'm writing articles about it and I'm doing videos about it, like I get a lot of hits on both of those. Like it's when you do a deep dive of a published adventure, it's a pretty easy topic to get attention on. So there's part of me that's like, it's a good, that's good. The other part though is like I wasn't that interested in running a homebrew adventure, right? So like with Eberron, I did it, but it wasn't like I was like, oh, I can't wait to run my own thing. I'm so tired of running these published ones. It's like, no, that's not true. Like I love running published adventures. And I run them all. And there's definitely like you don't have to worry too much about what the boss fight is going to be like.
well,
Because like, a Sararak in the thing, it's like
that's
it's
a whole
there.
other issue. I'm going to be recording an episode about this in a couple weeks as the plan. But because somebody asked, well, what do you do when we're not done? A listener emailed and is like, what do you do when you've run the WotC adventure and they're level 12 because all of them stop sort of around that level? But you're not done with these characters. You want to keep telling the story, and I'm like, well, if you think about it, like to my opinion, very few of the WotC published adventures actually end with what I consider to be a pretty satisfying campaign ending. It's a decent adventure ending, but it's not a campaign ending. I don't know. Princes of the Apocalypse, Tyranny of Dragons does that. Descent into Avernus can, depending on which ending you get, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't think I'm gonna have a problem tying up Descent into Avernus. I didn't with Storm King's Thunder.
See, I don't find the Storm King's Thunder ending satisfactory.
I loved mine.
Fine.
For me, I mean, again, so one thing I thought I was thinking about it today. I thought about this because I saw that the Sword Coast Adventures Guide is in the player bundle for the D&D Beyond, and I thought that was kind of interesting that they made that part of that package. And I thought like one of my big complaints about Storm King's Thunder was that like if it had come out the same time as the Sword Coast Adventures Guide, you would essentially have this like 192 page handout for Storm King's Thunder.
Sure.
Because
it runs all over
that book is a player. Yeah, they're covering the same territory. Only one is player focused. One the player can read all of it, right? And the other one the player cannot. And if you think about Storm King's Thunder as a campaign source book for the Sword Coast and not as an adventure,
sure,
it actually works.
Yeah,
better,
right? I think my only complaint about Storm King's Thunder is that the whole problem is predicated on the destruction of the Ordning, and the conclusion doesn't have anything to do with that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I guess like for me, tying the thread wasn't too hard, and like making Imrith a big final boss. Right. And I kind of set her as a major boss about halfway to 2/3 of the way.
I think the easiest way for me to fix it would be, and I'm never going to run it because my current group was playing that campaign with their last DM before I joined. So they've already played through a bunch of it, and it's okay. Then I'm not going to mess with your preconceptions about what it is. But I think if you just took out the entire ordning thing and just said the giants are going crazy because there's mess, the hierarchy's messed up because there's trouble in the storm giant court or whatever, right? And just ignored the ordning thing altogether, that maybe the story hangs together better. I don't know. We're going all over the place, but in any case, really strong, satisfying endings are hard, and when it's homebrew, like you mentioned, it feels like it's even harder because if it's not a satisfying ending, that's on you. Whereas,
right, and I think the easy way is like just go to brass tacks, like just. What does it have to accomplish? What does the ending have to accomplish? And then just have it do that. So it's like, what threads need to be tied together, tie them together, right. And anything that doesn't have to be done, don't try to do anything crazy or crafty. Just make it as straightforward as you can.
This is where I think for the last, 3, 4, 5 campaigns I've run, my method of coming up with a campaign is like, when the campaign starts, I already have like the last scene of the campaign in my head at the beginning of the the whole thing at session 0, I already have a vision in my head. Now it could change and it evolves and whatever, but as we go through the year and a half, whatever, of running that campaign, like it changes and evolves, but it also gets more detailed, and I figure out how to give it more oomph because I connect it more to the players, or And so I started with the end scene, and by the time they actually see it, like it's worked for me several times now that it's got some pretty significant oomph, and all of my campaigns of the last decade or so have ended with a very satisfying sort of conclusion. So
yeah. Well, and so that is it for me.
All right, well that's good because we have the three of us and with Sam being gone for a while have now talked for an hour and 20 minutes. So
hour and 40 according to
we've talked longer because we were streaming for 20 minutes before we even started recording the episode. So
yeah.
Although Steal Your Mind has a question, should we look at that real fast?
Sure.
I find myself in a situation where I have a changeling PC and their backstory specifically makes it so they don't understand their heritage. If you have all the world as your own, what would you do to mess with your PC? Go. I have a changeling PC in my Descent into Avernus game, and
I do too. I have changelings in my Eberron game,
and it's not Eberron, but that's specifically the whole thing. Is that I actually decided not to. This time, I decided not to like figure out how do changelings fit into the Forgotten Realms, which is what I did last time I had a changeling PC. In this case, because it's my son, I'm like, well, your grandparents are actually from Eberron, and they got stuck in the Forgotten Realms. And maybe they actually got stuck in Hell and came back with the fleeing Hell Riders, back in the day, that abandoned Zariel in Hell. And so we tied it all sort of together. And then I ran the... there's a DM's Guild product, Incursion. I think that was from several people, but James Intercasso was one of them. And that involves like encounters on the River Styx. And one of them was there's this weird experimental elemental ship from Eberron floating around in the River Styx that's been, that you can fight the Yugoloths off of it and take control of it and whatever. And so he was all about that, like going crazy, because it's from Eberron, and my parents told me stories about things like this, and I'd never seen one before. And maybe I can learn more about my heritage and all that kind of stuff. So he was super jazzed about picking up this ship. That now basically, there was in that little thing. There's an iron flask that the captain was using to sort of store the water elemental that ran the ship. Right, which actually works out really well in Avernus when you've got a boat on the River Styx, because you can't play the adventure and just stay on the River Styx the whole time. They have to just leave it sometimes on the banks of the river.
Right.
But the water elemental sort of works as the keys, right? They open the iron flask, they suck the water elemental back up, and now it's just stuck right here until we come back. It's anyway. That's how I've dealt with the changeling in my current campaign. I guess I didn't change it. I made it from Eberron, but I made it a story about... we made it a story about how that changeling got here. My last time we had it, I made it a curse. The character's mom had been cursed by a wizard back in the day for pissing him off, and she didn't know it, and he didn't know it, but it was going to be Halaster. This was the character who's no longer in the group, so it never really played out. But that was going to be the story, is that mom was cursed and turned into a changeling by Halaster. And then the curse was passed on to him, and that's why he was a changeling. But there's only just the two of them anywhere in the world. That was the other way I did it.
Right. Yeah, I don't know that I have anything to add.
Yeah, without getting into the specifics of Steal Your Mind's scenario, I don't know that we can
join us in the Sly Flourish Discord.
We
dig
can
in.
talk. Steal Your Mind is pretty frequent in the Tome Show Discord, and we have
Yeah, but he could also come over to the Sly Flourish Discord.
Absolutely, the Sly Flourish Discord is there are 5,000 messages a day. It's I don't know.
It's a little. Yeah, it's not quite.
It's too much signal for the noise for me.
It's all signal. It's 100%
if I get the message on the Tome Show Discord that there's more than 25 messages, I just skip them and go to the bottom.
Yeah, I tend to. Yeah, that's what I do.
So, Oh, Steal Your Mind is in both of those channels already, so we can talk about it there.
Yeah,
so.
see.
All right, but like I said, we are at 120 or 120, an hour and 25 minutes. We should we're probably going to be close to 125 minutes, right? We should probably wrap this episode up. So I want to thank everybody in the chat for joining us. This has been fun, and we miss Sam, so we're gonna assume that when Mike says good night, guys, or goodbye, guys, that Sam is here saying it too. So that's the end of the episode. Thanks for joining us, and join us next month when we do it all over again. Mike, say goodbye, guys.
Forgotten Realms is awesome.
Perfect. That was totally Sam that said that.
Totally Sam.
All right. End of the episode. We're still there in the stream. Oh, Steal Your Mind was trying to get us to our normal 90-minute length. 90 minutes has not been our normal. We've done it a few times, but it's not usually. I mean, I don't know. We've gotten more talkative over time. You were really close to your time. If I hadn't just kept asking you questions, you would have made it.
Let me tell you about my Star Wars video game.
That wasn't much. I didn't spend much time on that. I also don't know when the alarm went off. Did you hear it? Okay.
I did hear it.
Well, I kind of picked it up and put it up by the microphone because I don't know what it is with the alarms lately, but I don't know. Since I got this phone a year and a half ago, maybe it's the new version of the OS, but the volume on the alarm seemed to be based not on the volume of the phone, but on the alarm that you pick, and the alarm that I have just happens to be a really quiet one. So.
Right. All right, my friend, I gotta
go watch Harry Potter.
Yep.
All right. Thank you for joining us in the chat, everybody. Let me shut the chat down.
Yeah, thank you all.
Let me close the chat out. And bye-bye. And transition to the end.